In this section, we're going to talk about cabinet doors. So for the cabinet doors, I built for the cherry cabinets. I actually built them the same exact way I built the cabinets in our previous cabinet build, where we used the table saw with the dado blade, we cut the groove, and then we cut our rails and our tenons on the rails using a dado blade as well. The reason I did that is because it's really just the easiest approach to do it. I've done some router table work with doing shaker doors and tenons and grooves and that sort of thing, and I still think the table saw is probably the easiest way to do it. So at a future lesson, we'll probably demonstrate the router table method, but for now, if you're just getting into cabinets and if you just want to make these in mass, I find the table saw is just the way to go. So the big difference between these doors and the previous doors is going to be the insert. So since this is all hardwood cherry and we're going to do shaker doors, I had the option of doing what I did before, which is getting a 1/2-inch thick piece of plywood and kind of rabbiting the back edge, sticking it in here. But because this is cherry wood, it's a little different. So this is actually just 1/4-inch thick plywood, and it's just a real thin piece of 1/4-inch plywood I had left over from the cabinet backs, which we'll see when we build the cabinet boxes. But you could use 1/4-inch plywood for this. It looks fine. The only real issue is it's got a little bit of wave in it, and there's a gap in here that kind of is a little wider than it should be. And it's only wider than it should be because I screwed up when I built the grooves. It's a little wider than I'd like it to be. But if it's nice and tight, you probably won't have an issue. It'll be nice and tight and firm in there. It's more subject to a little bit of wave because it's 1/4-inch thick, so it's thinner than the 1/2-inch. But the 1/2-inch could just as easily get that. You could see that. You tend to see it less with 1/2-inch, but the other option you have when building cabinet doors and you want to do cherry, instead of doing what I did, is actually buying hardwood cherry, gluing it together, planing it down from 3/4-inch to a 1/2-inch, and then repeating that process and just putting it in here. Same thing goes if you wanted a raised panel door. So all those examples we'll probably do in a future lesson, but for now, for expediency and just kind of demonstrate the process, I wanted to show you could do 1/4-inch and it looks fine, but it's not the focus of this door lesson. I wanted to focus more on the inset and that sort of thing. But again, if these are hanging up and they're stained and poly, no one's going to be able to tell the difference really if this is what kind of insert it is. I mean, the other thing is this cherry 1/4-inch has a cherry veneer in the front. The back is probably just birch. So when you stain this and stuff, the back may have a little different color. So maybe the back required another coat or a different color to match it. But for the purposes of this lesson, this is sufficient. So what are we going to do now? So these are inset doors. And unlike the previous doors, you can't just hang them, right? So we built these per the dimensions of our plans. And they were just, whatever the dimensions of these openings will be, that's what we built cabinet doors to. So they are going to be tight. So if I try to put them in here, they're really not going to fit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift the camera down, and we're going to talk about how to get these cabinet doors to fit in the frame. All right, I've got my face frame for my lower cabinet here, and this went together fine. I've also got my doors, which we just discussed. So these doors we want them to be inset into this frame, okay? And when I built them, you may have seen me do some previous videos on YouTube where I took each board, both rails and stiles, and fit them to the exact opening they were going into. Instead, for this case, I built these directly from the plans. I kind of estimated what the widths and lengths would be in here and cut those boards and just built them from the plans, and they worked out fine. All right, so this is my, from your angle, this is my right door, here's my left one. So they ended up being a hair too long, which is fine because we have to take a lot of material off these anyway. So they are too long by, geez, a 32nd of an inch. They fit in there width-wise perfectly, so our rail machining went really well. This is my drawer front, just a solid piece of cherry wood. Okay, I'm going to try to push that back in here. If it doesn't fit in, no big deal. So what we're going to do is, at this point, we want a nice even gap all the way around our doors and all the way around the drawer front, since these are inset. That gap should be around 1/8 of an inch or so. In previous videos, I've actually used the thickness of a door hinge to set that. You could do that too. If it's the right gap, the door will open and close and without any issues. Same thing goes for the drawer. They can't be too snug, otherwise they'll rub. Too loose, and they won't look nice. So to set that gap, I'm going to use something I've used before, which are laminate countertop samples. So these are laminate countertop samples you can get at Lowe's, Home Depot, Menards, your local home improvement store. And what they do is they're free. You can basically walk in there, take one off the rack, and say thank you very much. So I got a bunch of these. I'm going to use 2 of them together. And 2 of them together get you a little below 1/8 of an inch or so. And what we're going to do is with these samples and with a pencil, I'm basically going to push these doors in, and I'm going to run the laminate sample, okay, against the face frame, and with a pencil we'll trace an outline of these face frames onto the doors. First thing I need to do though, so I'm going to pause this, and I'm going to take the doors and drawer front off, and then I'm going to lift up the face frame with some 1/2 inch material underneath it. That'll kind of let me push the doors and drawer fronts into them and allow me to make this trace a little better. So I'm going to pause this and get that set up. All right, so I've gone and put some 1/2 inch shim stock, whatever extra lumber I had lying around, underneath the face frame. I have it underneath the face frame but not obstructing any of the doorways or door openings. What I'm going to do is just sort of push these doors back into these openings so they'll sink into the hole below the face frame a little bit, which is what we want. All right, same thing, I could do this drawer front as well the same way, but this one actually is so tight that I can barely push on it. So I'll probably machine this one a little separately, and I'll show you what I'm going to do for that. So I've got my laminate samples. What I'm going to do is push the laminate sample up against the edge of the face frame onto the door, so it's sitting on the door edge. And so first of all, the first issue I want to deal with is the fact that they're a little bit too long, so I'm going to take off some length. So I'm just going to pick this edge, because this is the one I have in there, and I'm going to take my sample, push it against the face frame, take my pencil, and basically draw a line, and you could pull, kind of trace it as you pull it, or you can go along and just kind of make some marks as you go. Either way, you'll end up getting a nice, clearly defined line on the door. All right, and now we have a line on the front edge of these doors that we can remove the material up until that line, and we know we'll have our gap. We'll have to address this other end as well, but what we can do for the very first part of this anyway is take these off and trim that line. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, I'm about to run this first door through the joiner. So you could either do this on a table saw, or you can do it on a joiner. If you do it on a table saw, you really need a cross-cutting sled to make this kind of cut, at least to do it safely. The joiner, you could do it just as easily. Since I'm passing 2 end grain boards over the joiner blades, I'm going to do something a little different here. Now, if I'm running this edge down, so if I'm running the board the other way, long ways, this is all long grain going over the joiner blade. It's not an issue. But because these 2 boards here are facing down, the grain's running long ways or end grained facing the blade, this particular board is going to want to chip out as the blade passes over it. So to alleviate that, I'm using a sacrificial board here. This little piece of scrap wood I have clamped to the end of the board. And what that'll do is as I pass this board over the joiner, it'll prevent this last bit of this board from chipping out. So this one will get beat up, but this one won't, and that's what we want. So what I'm going to do is turn on the joiner and get my earring protection on. We'll make a couple passes to show you what that looks like, and I'm going to keep an eye on this pencil line as we get closer to it. I'm not going to go quite to it yet, but we'll be able to put the board back in, the door back in, the face frame, and it should fit fine. Then we can go back and do the rest of our perimeter. So let's go ahead and show you what this looks like. Put this here for a second. Put that back down. All right, so you can see from that little demonstration that this scrap board got pretty blown out. It actually tore this open pretty nicely. But the good news is my cherry board didn't get touched at all. It actually looks pretty good. So this sacrificial board did its work. We've also taken the pencil, the wood off just to about the pencil line. So we're good to go. Put it back in, see how it looks. Okay, I've got my door out of the joiner. This is the edge we jointed. This is a nice smooth flat edge. Let's see how it fits. So I'm going to push it in, drop it in. Awesome. It sinks into the face frame hole, which is what I wanted it to do. It's still very, very tight, which is as expected. We didn't cut the whole perimeter, but we just took enough off to let it fit. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to take my laminate countertop samples. I am going to pull the door this way. Since we cut this edge a little bit, if I have to take any more material off, I'd rather take it off the edge we didn't touch yet, which is up here. So I'm going to, again, take my laminate countertop samples, hold them against the face frame, and now I'm going to draw a line around the whole perimeter. A nice heavy line that I can really see pretty easily. All right, do that side. And I'll trace it here. You don't ever want to use pen or marker. Pencil is always the way to go. It doesn't really leach into the wood. You don't want to use a Sharpie, for instance. I don't know how it would do with paint, but I know with stain. The pores of the wood, the grains of the wood would just pull it right in. You'd never get it out. So always stick with a nice pencil for this kind of stuff, if that wasn't already obvious to you. So I'm just going to finish up here. All right, so I have a perimeter line all the way around this cabinet door. Once I cut all that, I'll have a gap equal to this laminate sample piece, equal to that thickness. And that's what we want to go for. So I just showed you how to do the end grain boards by kind of clamping a piece. Again, you can do this with a table saw if you feel more comfortable doing that. The only issue with doing a table saw is that you're going to have some machine marks that you'll need to sand later on. So you need to sand those out. We're going to sand these anyway, but you'd have to do a little heavier sanding. With the joiner, I'm pretty much good to go. I can do a quick finish sand, rough it up, and we're good. So what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to show this, is I'm going to spend the next 45 minutes or so taking off all the material around these doors on the joiner. It's pretty boring, nothing you need to see, but you just witnessed me doing that for a little bit. So once I come back, both these doors will fit in here with a nice gap, as well as the drawer front. But again, it's the same process. Draw a pencil, join it or remove it at the table saw up to the line, and you're done. Make sure it puts back in and fits. The last thing I want to show you before we proceed to that is I'm going to put a little mark here indicating which door this is. So from your direction, this is the right door. Nope. This is my direction. It's important to know your left from your right, I guess, right? This is L, this is R. A man can build cabinets, but he doesn't know his right from his left, right? So this is L. I'll put a little triangle next to it to indicate this is facing up. All right, so I don't want to get these confused. Now that we are cutting them to each opening, there could be subtle differences in the dimensions between one and the other. I don't want to then get these doors crossed over. You could also write it on the edge of these doors to the top. We are going to be sanding these at some point, so we won't see those. We will lose that writing. You can put them on a piece of tape, whatever you want to do to keep this memorized. I'm also going to do that for my drawer front, because I'm going to get this fitted in here, and once I get it cut, I don't want to figure out what side's which, so I'll do a triangle up here. Indicates this side is up and this is the front. All right, so let me go ahead and do that, and we'll come back and I'll just show you what it looks like with it all fitted up. Okay, with all the trimming around the door and drawer fronts all done, this is what you end up with. You should have a nice, even, consistent gap all the way around the doors and drawers. Should look pretty good. And you also want to make sure, if you're using any visible hinges, which when we get to that, that the gap stays even. Sometimes those hinges can adjust it. But for now, this looks good for a first pass.